The night the house remembered me by name, it did not raise its voice. The rage came from people, not from walls. I stood on the steps with misty rain needling my cheeks, while music thumped through my seaside retreat and strangers laughed across the rug I had chosen with my husband before he died. My daughter-in-law sliced the air with a voice that could skin fish and said, "There is no room for you here, you parasite." Somewhere inside, a man poured beer directly onto my handmade carpet, and 2 children kicked a ball through my geraniums. I did not plead. I pulled out my phone, cut off every transfer to my son with hands that shook only once, and tapped record. The wind brought the smell of sea salt and warm electronics. The betrayal stank more than both. I had laid those bricks with Richard on a spring weekend that smelled of resin and coffee. We measured twice and laughed when the board warped in the sun. Years later, after his heart stopped without warning, I worked at my sewing table until dawn, covering other people's tears with precise stitches, and telling myself that a house by the water could keep a family unbroken. I raised one boy into a man and gave him more chances than the tides give the shore. The day I returned by weekend habit, the driveway was choked with unknown cars, and the porch chairs lay splintered like cracked ribs. Helen opened the door, and the apron I had embroidered with "Home is where love lives," and looked at me as if I had wandered in from an alley.
"Why are you here? Alan said you hardly use this place. We are making use of it. None of your business."
I kept my voice steady, because steadiness had saved me more than once. "This is my property, Helen." I came to brew coffee and read a few pages the way I have for years. "You invited strangers here without asking." She curled her lip and said, "What is yours is your son's, and what is your son's is his. Share like an adult." I heard laughter burst from the living room, a sound I used to think meant family. I let the key fall from my fingers so I would not throw it. The small clink sounded like thunder in my chest. I bent, picked it up, and left. The old Seaside motel, a mile down the road, smelled of salt and tired curtains. The neon outside the window buzzed like a fly that refused to die. I set my purse on the small desk, opened a brown notebook, and wrote in careful letters that did not waver. March 14th, 8:15 a.m. House occupied without consent. Present, Helen Reed, 2 children, 3 unidentified adults. Property damage visible at porch and living room. I added license plates in the color of the beer cans and the exact pattern of the shoe prints on my oak floor. I sent the photos to my private email, backed everything to a drive, and pressed my palm to the cool glass. I told Richard I was sorry for letting our door become a swinging gate and promised I would close it again by law, not noise. When the clock slid to 10 p.m., I dialed a number from an old folded card. Attorney Ethan Carver answered through his assistant with brisk mercy. "We can see you at 9 a.m. Emergency cases are prioritized." The words felt like heat returning to fingers that had been too long in water. I canceled every automatic transfer to my son one by one, like cutting threads that had wrapped around my throat. The numbers were not large, but the ritual mattered more than the sums. It was the first time in years that I allowed the word boundary to sit inside my chest without shame. Sleep came in square pieces between the whoosh of the heater and the soft slap of the neon. At dawn, I woke before the alarm brewed motel coffee that tasted like scorched paper and reviewed my list. Bank, insurance, lawyer, evidence. The order steadied me the way pinning a long seam steadies fabric before the needle bites. Yet something in me balked at fighting a battle I could not fully map. I needed to know what I was truly facing. I drove back to the house under a sky the pale blue of tired eyes. The ocean looked gentle, but hid its weight the way people hide their intentions. At the door, I pressed the bell twice. Helen's sister appeared in a sleep set and a scowl. "What do you want now?" "Personal items only," I said. 30 minutes, and I'm gone." She rolled her eyes and waved a cigarette like a cheap wand. "Make it quick. Do not bother Helen." The living room smelled of damp fabric and cheap perfume. My blue floral sofa was scalded at the arm. The white curtains were gray with smoke. I moved carefully, photographing everything, saying nothing. On the stairs, a nail hole gaped where my anniversary photo had once hung. In the bedroom, the bed I had built for Richard with oak and optimism was rumpled by strangers. The wardrobe door stood open, a corner of its frame chipped by a clumsy pry. My pulse slowed to a deliberate metronome. I knelt and opened the hidden compartment I had always used for documents. The velvet box that held my mother's pearls was empty. The envelope with the deed lay crumpled. Under old newspapers, I found a stack of papers with a faint red seal. I read the title and felt the floor dip like a boat in a sudden swell. Petition to transfer property due to incapacity. My name below it in firm, black letters. Attached was a certification by a doctor I had never met, declaring that I showed signs of cognitive decline and could not manage assets. On the first page appeared my son's name as the proposed legal manager.
I stared until the words steadied and then photographed each page, front and back, edges and shadows. I sealed the copies in the envelope I had brought for exactly this moment and wrote in red ink across the front that single word I learned to trust more than hope: evidence.
On the way out, I heard Helen in the kitchen, her voice high with a triumph she had not earned. "The doctor will sign in the morning." Alan already agreed. "It will be easy." The sentence fell like cold iron across my shoulders. I did not turn. I walked down the stairs with my notebook tucked against my ribs and the envelope under my arm. At the bottom, her sister smirked and asked if I had found what I needed. I gave her a small, courteous smile that drew back her chin. "Yes," I said, "exactly what I needed." Outside, the wind had shifted. It tasted of rain and judgment. I unlocked my car and let the old engine rasp alive. The house behind me hummed with borrowed music. The water ahead kept its patient beat. I placed the envelope on the passenger seat as if it were a living thing. Then I drove to town, toward the bank, toward the attorney, toward a version of myself that did not ask love to do the work of the law ever again. The bank's lobby smelled of polish and quiet power, the kind that makes people lower their voices and count twice before they speak. Margaret Doyle, who had managed my accounts for years, looked up from her screen and recognized me the way an old map recognizes its own creases. I asked for privacy, and in a small glass-walled room, I said the thing that cost me more pride than any number on a ledger: I believe someone intends to interfere with my assets. I need every third-party access removed and every alert set to loud. Margaret's mouth tightened with a banker's careful sympathy, and then her hands moved fast. While she worked, I watched the reflection of blue light on her glasses and remembered the mornings I had deposited $20 at a time after sewing through the night. When she finished, she handed me a stack of printouts and a pen. The confirmations were simple words, but they felt like new locks sliding into place. I asked for a letter on bank letterhead stating that I was fully competent and actively managing my finances. She studied my face and did not argue. When she returned with the letter signed and stamped, I saw a flicker of respect in her eyes. It steadied me more than the ink. We reviewed balances because preparedness is a form of courage. Savings near $92,000, certificates of deposit near $18,000, checking near $9,500. I wrote the totals in my notebook with clean lines and told myself that truth is calmer than fear. Before I left, Margaret touched my sleeve and said the name I had already circled in hope. "There's an attorney named Ethan Carver who protects seniors from asset abuse. Honest man?" I nodded and told her I had an appointment at 9 a.m. The confirmation on my phone glowed like a small lighthouse. At Atlantic Mutual, the young clerk smelled faintly of vanilla and newness. I told her I needed to file a theft claim for a rose gold wedding band, a pearl necklace, and a silver pocket watch that belonged to my father. The clerk asked if I had photos and receipts. I slid a small drive across the counter and felt a strange surge of gratitude toward my younger self, who had scanned everything in 2003 and saved it twice. She promised an acknowledgement by afternoon and explained timelines and valuations. I listened and nodded. None of it could replace a life, but a lawful trail was beginning to form under my feet, and I needed it to be solid. At noon, I sat at the motel's narrow desk, spread the photographs and documents, and began building a case, the way I once built quilts, piece by careful piece. Every image was duplicated, labeled, and backed up to a drive and to a private cloud folder that only I could enter. I listened to the recording from the kitchen doorway and wrote a precise transcript of Helen's voice saying the doctor will sign in the morning. Each time the words played, the ache in my chest turned more into fuel. At 3:45 p.m., I walked into a limestone building with a modest sign that did not need to shout. Carver and Associates held its quiet like an oath. The receptionist led me into an office that smelled of oak and straightforwardness. When Ethan Carver entered the room, it felt less like a place to plead and more like a place to work. He was tall with a steady gaze that sorted panic from fact without cruelty. I set my file stack on his desk and spoke simply. My daughter-in-law and my son attempted to seize my house through forged documents and a false medical certification. I have photographs, audio, and the draft paperwork. I want the law to do what love could not. Carver listened without interrupting. He turned pages with a patience that sharpened rather than softened. When he reached the certification from a doctor, I had never seen his expression changed from neutral to iron. "This is medical document forgery and senior asset fraud," he said quietly. "You preserved the chain of evidence better than most police reports I have read. With your permission, I will file for an emergency eviction order, a temporary freeze on any attempt to sell or mortgage your property, and a restraining order to protect you. We will refer the physician to the state board and request a criminal inquiry. It will be decisive, and it will be by the book." I signed the power of attorney with hands that did not shake. He called an inspector named Rossi while I watched the sun pool in a gold square on the floor. The conversation was brief because men who are ready do not waste syllables.
Rossi would prepare an enforcement team and be on standby within 48 hours. Carver explained what would happen at the house with the clarity of an engineer. 2 hours to vacate once the order was served. Video documentation of every minute to avoid theatrics. An inventory at the door to ensure nothing of mine walked out in a suitcase. No raised voices, no arguments in the driveway, only the slow weight of the law.
When everything was arranged, I felt an unexpected looseness in my shoulders, as if someone had finally lifted a beam that had been resting there for years. On my way back to the motel, I stopped at Blue Wave Coastal Cleaning and booked a full restoration for the day after enforcement. The manager looked at me as if she understood that cleaning was not just about floors and promised her crew would be ready. I crossed the street to the small hardware shop and found Bill, who had installed my original locks years ago. I asked him to be on call to replace every lock the hour the order was executed. He joked about storms and bad wind, and I gave him a small smile that did not bend. The door would close, and it would close for good. Back in the room, I arranged the file stack once more and wrote a single sentence at the top of the page for court. I am not here for revenge. I am here for restoration. At 8:30 p.m., I set 2 alarms because old habits comfort the body when the mind is too alert to rest. Then I lay on the stiff bed and listened to the ocean breathe beyond the neon counting waves like stitches until sleep came in uneven squares. By sunrise, the sea lay calm and silver, pretending it hadn't seen what was about to unfold. I dressed in my gray suit, pinned Richard's small brooch near my collar, and drove to the house with the file case on the passenger seat. Ethan Carver's car was already there, black and exact. Next to it stood a patrol vehicle and a notary's SUV, the morning light glinting off their windshields. Inspector Rossi nodded to me with the kind of respect given to someone who's already done the hard part, telling the truth. Carver stepped forward, his voice calm. Mrs. Monroe, we're ready. The court order is in effect. Everything will be filmed for record. I nodded and whispered, I don't need them to fear me, Mr. Carver. I just need them to remember I still exist. The siren chirped once, cutting through the salt air. Helen's face appeared in the kitchen window, confusion giving way to panic as she saw uniforms at the gate. She opened the door, coffee spilling from her trembling hand. What's going on? You can't do this, she snapped. Carver lifted the document and read aloud, his tone firm as stone. Under Section 2.3, 1 of the New Jersey Personal Property Protection Act, this residence is confirmed as the sole property of Mrs. Jeanette Monroe. Occupants? Helen Reed and associated parties are hereby ordered to vacate within 2 hours. Rossi's officers started the timer. Helen went pale, stumbling backward. You're joking. This is my husband's family home. Carver met her gaze. No one jokes with the law, ma'am. I stepped forward, my shoes clicking softly on the wet stone. The same porch that once held my husband's laughter now held the sound of justice being served. Helen's eyes widened when she saw me. What are you doing? She hissed. Taking back what's mine, I answered. Just then, Alan's car screeched into the drive. He looked half-dressed, his tie hanging loose, face ashen. Mom, please, this is a misunderstanding, he said, rushing toward me. Rossi held a hand up. Mr. Alan Monroe, you are identified as a co-signer on a fraudulent medical transfer draft. Here is your summons. You have 3 days to appear before court. Alan's lips parted, but no words came. Helen spun to him, her voice sharp with desperation. You have to say she's senile, Alan. Tell them she's lost her mind. That's why we did it. I felt my stomach twist, but kept my tone calm. Strangers didn't forge my signature. My family did. Alan's voice cracked. We were in debt, Mom. We thought if we used the house as collateral, we could fix everything. I didn't mean I stopped him softly. You didn't mean to stop it either. And sometimes, silence is the worst betrayal. Helen was shouting now, her words trembling as much from fear as fury. She's lying. She's unstable. You can't trust her. Carver set down a folder on the porch table with quiet precision. This, he said, is a bank-certified statement confirming Mrs. Monroe's full financial competence, signed and stamped yesterday. Every false claim you made just became evidence against you. Rossi's camera light blinked red. The only sound afterward was the sea wind scraping against the house. Inside, chaos erupted. Verity and the children hurried upstairs, slamming drawers and shoving clothes into suitcases. Rossi's officers followed the eviction protocol with cold professionalism, documenting every move. Helen clutched her head and sobbed, pleading now. You can't throw us out like this. Where will we go? Carver answered evenly. Some lessons are only learned when comfort ends. I stood still, watching the family that once called me a parasite scramble beneath the weight of consequence. It wasn't joy that filled me. It was a clean, heavy silence. Alan approached again, his voice barely a whisper.
Mom, please. Don't do this. Drop the case, and we'll leave everything to you.
I looked at him and felt a strange peace.
If I forgive you today, I said you'll think betrayal can be excused by love. I won't see you jailed, but I won't let you think I'm weak. He swallowed, eyes wet. You raised me better than this, he murmured. Yes, I said. That's what makes this harder.
That's when the final minute ticked away. Rossi stepped forward.
Time's up.
Helen clutched her children.
Verity dragged her suitcase, and Alan lingered last at the gate. The midday sun struck his face, hollowing his expression into something almost childlike. If I lose everything, he asked, quietly, will that make you happy? I met his eyes. No, but sometimes pain is the only teacher left. He turned without another word, and when their car rolled away, the sound of gravel under tires felt like punctuation at the end of a long chapter.
The officers packed up the notary, signed the last forms, and the yard fell quiet, except for the rhythmic hush of waves.
Rossi handed me the final inventory, all my belongings intact. Justice rarely makes noise, ma'am, he said softly. But when it does, it sounds like this. I nodded, my eyes, burning but dry. Thank you, Inspector. Today the law remembered I exist.
That evening, after the police left, I stood in the doorway of my reclaimed house. The air inside was heavy with smoke, grease, and memory.
I didn't step farther yet. I only whispered to the walls, I'm home. Outside, the sea breathed slow and endless, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the ground under me hold steady again.
The following morning, a blue van pulled into the driveway at exactly 9 a.m. The logo read, Blue Wave Cleaning Service, its letters crisp against the salt-worn paint. Marie, the manager, stepped out first, polite and brisk.
We'll start in the living room, Mrs. Monroe. Would you like to supervise?
I nodded.
Every step. I want to see it all come clean.
For hours, the house echoed with the hum of vacuums and the slap of wet rags. The air thickened with the scent of lemon cleaner and soap. Each room told a story of violation wine stains on my handmade rug, cigarette burns on the sofa Richard and I had chosen, greasy fingerprints along the kitchen walls. I watched in silence as they scrubbed away what could be erased and photographed what couldn't. In the bedroom, I stopped. The oak bed frame Richard built was scarred, and the wardrobe gaped open like a wound.
The small compartment where I had once hidden keepsakes was empty. My mother's pearls, my father's silver watch, my wedding ring all gone. My throat tightened, but no tears came. Instead, I took a photo, time-stamped it, and whispered to the empty drawer. You'll come home too? By afternoon, Marie's crew had finished. The walls gleamed faintly in the sunlight, the air lighter cleaner. She wiped her hands on her apron and said, It'll feel like yours again. I looked around the quiet house and answered softly, It already does. When they left, I stood alone in the silence. It wasn't emptiness this time, it was space for peace to grow. Then Bill arrived, toolbox in hand, his gray cap tilted back. All locks like we planned, he asked. All, I replied. The metal clicks echoed like small heartbeats as he worked through every door and window. When he handed me the new keyring, I gripped it tight. These are the originals, he said. Only you have them. The weight in my palm felt heavier than gold proof that Control had returned home. Later, a technician installed cameras at the porch, hallway, and gate. On the monitor, I saw the full picture of my world again, every corner, secure, every angle, clear. I smiled faintly. If they ever come back, I murmured, they'll see themselves before they see me. That evening, I arranged my documents neatly across the dining table, insurance claim, bank letters, police report, photographs. Everything labeled and sealed. My phone buzzed. A message from Carver, Mrs. Monroe, Dr. Patterson's license has been suspended. Investigation confirms multiple forged medical certificates, including yours. Your case will lead the prosecution. I stared at the screen, reading twice. Not joy, just a long, deep exhale. Some wrongs don't need revenge. They just need exposure. I replied, Thank you. We don't need to win quickly, only correctly. When night fell, the house settled into quiet. I brewed herbal tea, opened my brown leather notebook, and wrote slowly. I'm not seeking punishment. I'm restoring balance. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing not to let pain make the decisions. A few days later, I called Carver. I'd like to amend my will, I told him. The house will go to a foundation protecting seniors from financial and psychological abuse. I won't let it become bait again. He was silent for a moment, then said gently, That's brave, Mrs. Monroe. Not brave, I said. Necessary. Justice needs a roof. The next morning, sunlight spilled through freshly washed windows. I made coffee, sat at my table, and let the quiet wrap around me.
I thought of Richard's laugh of Alan as a child chasing waves on the sand, of the years I spent stitching other people's tears. And then I thought of the door locked now, the keys resting on the table beside my cup. For the first time, that sound, the small metallic jingle, felt like freedom. But healing doesn't come without a shadow. 3 weeks after the eviction, the phone rang one windless afternoon. The caller ID read Verity Reed. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice trembled. Mrs. Monroe, Helen's broke. The accounts are frozen debts piling up. Alan lost his job. Please drop the case. She can't take this anymore. I looked out toward the sea, the horizon bright and sharp. Are you calling for amends? I asked quietly. Or for money? Silence. Then a faint whisper. Maybe both. I hung up without another word. 2 days later, an old car stopped at the gate. Helen stepped out thin and pale, clutching a worn black bag. I opened the door before she knocked. She stood on the porch, eyes rimmed red. May I come in? I nodded once. She walked into the living room and stared at the polished furniture, her voice small. Everything's so clean. I answered, dust is easy to wipe. Damage takes longer. Then she unzipped the bag and pulled out 3 things that glimmered under the afternoon light, my father's silver watch, my mother's pearl necklace, and my wedding ring. My breath caught. Helen's voice cracked. We found them in the storage. I know we were wrong. I can't live with it anymore. Please, don't send Alan to jail. He's weak, not evil. I studied her face, creased with guilt stripped of arrogance. Helen, I said slowly, ignorance isn't innocence when it hurts others. You forged trust, not just paper. She nodded, tears spilling. I'd rather live poor than live like that again. I signed the receipt for the returned items, my hand steady. I accept these, I said, but the case continues. Forgiveness isn't the same as escape, she whispered. Is there any way to start over? I paused. Starting over doesn't mean going back. It means planting somewhere new. She bowed her head, gathered her empty bag, and left without looking back. That evening, I placed the jewelry in a new drawer and wrote in my journal, some things, once lost, never return whole. But the lesson does. The sea outside murmured softly against the shore, and I understood that peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the moment you stop letting it lead. 3 months later, the courthouse in Cape May smelled faintly of rain and paper. I walked through its stone doors, wearing the same gray suit I'd worn on the day of the eviction, the one Richard used to say made me look like I meant business. The courtroom was packed with quiet faces, neighbors, a few local reporters and strangers who had read about the case. Across the aisle sat Helen and Alan, thinner, smaller somehow. Their lawyer shuffled papers that could not hide the truth. When the judge entered, everyone rose and the air shifted from noise to gravity. Carver presented our case with precision. The defendants, he said, forged medical documents to declare Mrs. Jeanette Monroe mentally incompetent, trespassed on her property, and attempted to seize her home. We have audio evidence, photographs, and testimony from the doctor who admits to taking payment for falsified certificates. The defense lawyer muttered something about misunderstanding, but the judge's raised eyebrows silenced him. The hearing lasted 2 hours. When the verdict came, the judge's voice was measured but firm. Defendants Alan Monroe and Helen Reed are found guilty of fraud and unlawful occupation. Each will pay $25,000 in fines, complete 200 hours of community service, and remain under probation for 2 years. Dr. Leonard Patterson faces criminal charges for forgery and bribery. The gavel fell sharp as thunder. Helen covered her face and wept. Alan stared at the floor, shoulders shaking. I felt no triumph, only quiet rightness. Justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't sing, it exhales. Outside, the air was cold and salt-heavy. Carver walked beside me down the courthouse steps. They'll pay far more in legal fees, he said. But you, Mrs. Monroe, you won fully. I smiled faintly. I didn't come to win. I came to prove that people my age aren't prey. He nodded, his voice low. And you did. 3 days later, the local paper printed my story under the headline, 70-year-old woman wins, case against family fraud. There was a photo of me leaving the courthouse, keys in hand, the ocean glinting behind. The caption read, her smile wasn't pride, it was peace. I clipped the article, folded it neatly, and tucked it into my journal. The following week, I was invited to speak at the community center for a seminar on financial safety for seniors. I hesitated before saying yes, but when I arrived that evening, more than 30 people filled the small room, faces lined with worry and quiet strength. I stood before them with no speech, just my story. I once believed love alone could protect everything I said softly. But sometimes, blind love is the door that lets others in to take what's most precious. Protecting your assets isn't distrust, it's self-respect. When I finished, the room was silent, except for the rustle of tissues. A woman in her 70s approached me, eyes wet. My daughter borrowed my name to take out a loan.
Now the bank wants my house, she whispered. I took her hand. Start documenting everything. Photos, receipts, dates. Speak up. Silence only protects those who harm you. She nodded, trembling, and I saw myself in her, the same confusion, the same flicker of resolve. That night, I couldn't sleep. I opened my laptop and began writing what I wished someone had given me years ago. 10 steps to protect your assets in later life. Keep copies of all documents. Read before signing. Record conversations about money. Open alerts for transactions. Update your will. Never let fear or love cloud your judgment. By the time I reached number 10, silence never protects you. The clock read past midnight. The ocean's rhythm outside matched the steady beat of my resolve.
A week later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox, the handwriting shaky but familiar. Alan. Inside was a letter written in uneven lines. Mom, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know I understand the price of silence. Every night, I remember your face when you held that fake certificate. I deserved your anger. I'm doing community service at a nursing home now. I hear stories from residents whose kids did the same to them. Every time I mop a floor, I think about Cape May and you by the window. I'm sorry for losing myself, not just you. I read it twice, folded it, and slipped it into the drawer beside my restored jewelry. No tears, no smile, just stillness. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant setting boundaries. Sometimes silence is not weakness. It's the border between peace and pain. When spring returned, I began planting again. Lavender along the fence, herbs by the porch, new geraniums where the old ones had been trampled. Life, it seemed, knew how to start over, even after storms. The children Hannah and Micah visited on weekends. They ran through the yard, laughter echoing where arguments once lived. Hannah asked one morning, Grandma, why do adults hurt each other? I paused before answering. Because they forget that fairness is also a kind of love. Without fairness, love loses its shape. She nodded, as if she understood more than her age should allow. That summer, I founded the Jeanette Foundation, a small nonprofit, to help seniors facing financial abuse. On opening day, Carver attended his smile proud but modest. You turned pain into purpose, he told me. I shook his hand. I just didn't want anyone else to learn this lesson the hard way. On the wall behind us hung a plaque engraved with the Foundation's first principle: self-respect is the one asset no one has the right to take. Months passed quietly. Alan completed his community service and emailed me a simple note, I'd like to take you to dinner. Not to explain, just to sit with you. I agreed. We met at a small seaside cafe at dusk. The waves rolled in, slow, the air cool and forgiving. We spoke little. Sometimes silence says more than sorrow can. When the meal ended, he said, I'm replanting flowers in our yard like you taught me. I answered, Then water them every day, Alan. Flowers only bloom when the gardener means it. A few weeks later, I saw Helen outside the homeless center handing out warm meals to the elderly. She looked older, humbler, no makeup, no performance. When she spotted me, she bowed her head slightly. Hello, Mrs. Monroe. I nodded back. No words, just quiet recognition between two women who had learned what greed can cost. Forgiveness. I realized isn't a moment, it's a journey walked in silence. As autumn settled over Cape May, I amended my will one final time. The house would belong to the foundation and to my grandchildren only if they lived by 3 rules: respect honesty and no deceitful borrowing. When I signed, I exhaled like someone laying down a heavy load. That night, the ocean outside shimmered under the full moon. I brewed lavender tea, opened my journal, and wrote the closing line of my story. I fell, but I stood up, and I'm still standing strong. I placed the pen down, smiled at the quiet house, and whispered, Justice came not loudly, but exactly when it was meant to. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe, so more people can hear that it's never too late to stand up for your worth. And tell me in the comments, have you ever rebuilt yourself after betrayal? I'd love to hear your story.